Hi there, 7th graders. This is American History, Chapter 15, The Spirit of Reform. Section 3, Cultural and Social Change. I'm starting on page 484. Please follow along. The main idea of this section: throughout the early and mid-1800s, activists worked to reform a variety of social ills. Today we'll learn why the treatment of the mentally ill changed in the mid-1800s, what techniques temperance societies used to win people over to their beliefs, and how the Second Great Awakening affected reform movements. With pity and horror on her face, Dorothea Dix stared into a cell at a poorhouse, a public house for people who could not live on their own, in Danvers, Massachusetts. Inside, a young woman was beating on the cell bars. Her hair looked matted and dirty, and her clothes hung in rags. Dix stayed to observe as long as she could, but the bad smell from the cell soon forced her to leave. Reforming prisons. At the beginning of the 19th century, Americans viewed the United States as a land of unlimited opportunity. Many believed that those who had failed did so because they had bad characters. As a result, debtors, children who were offenders, and the mentally ill were often locked up in jails with murderers and thieves. Dorothea Dix and other reformers worked to change Americans' ways of thinking about these institutions and their inmates. New prison systems. During the early 1800s, some Americans realized that the mistreatment of prisoners did little to improve the characters of criminals. Worse, it warped the characters of children and debtors. After all, these prisoners were more victims of society than dangerous lawbreakers. In response to these new ideas, states shifted their focus from punishment to rebuilding character. Beginning in 1816, New York and Pennsylvania built new prison systems near Syracuse and Philadelphia. The authorities there attempted to change prisoners through work, Bible study, and meditation. Josiah Quincy became a vocal prison reformer in Massachusetts. During the 1820s, he led a pamphlet crusade against cruelty in New England prisons. He also spoke out against locking up children with hardened criminals. In 1823, Quincy became mayor of Boston. During his administration, he helped form the Prison Discipline Society and started making changes in prisons. Due to the efforts of reformers like Quincy, Boston and other places in the U.S. opened houses of refuge during the 1820s. These institutions took in only very young offenders. The children there attended classes, learned trades, and received religious instruction. Rescuing mentally ill prisoners. Dorothea Dix first observed prison conditions while teaching Sunday school at a Boston prison for women in 1841. She wanted to find out if all of the prisons in the states were as appalling. Over a 2-year period, Dix investigated 18 state penitentiaries, 300 county jails, and more than 500 poorhouses. Now just do the math there. The number of days in 2 years' time, hard saying if she visited every day, maybe she did. That's a lot of places that she collected data and observed what was going on. Dix decided to appeal to the Massachusetts government for help. In 1843, she addressed the following report to the state legislature. I proceed, gentlemen, briefly to call your attention to the present state of insane persons, confined in cages, closets, cellars, stalls, pens, chained, naked, beaten with rods, and lashed into obedience. As a result of Dix's report, Massachusetts passed a law to build mental hospitals where mental illness could be treated as a disease rather than a crime. Dix continued her appeals in New England and other parts of the nation. By 1852, she had persuaded 11 states to open hospitals for persons with mental illness. Crusading for temperance. Reformers considered alcoholism, the excessive and continued use of alcoholic drinks, a major cause of crime. After the American Revolution, rum, beer, whiskey, and hard cider became cheap and easy to get. As a result, the number of American alcoholics increased. Crime, poverty, and the abuse of wives and children increased right along with it. Alcohol abuse was widespread during this time. Employers often paid part of the workers' wages in rum or whiskey. Workers took rum breaks, similar to today's coffee breaks. Reformers felt the widespread use and abuse of alcohol undermined American society. Most of the reform leaders were religious leaders, interested in doing away with social evils such as poverty and crime, often brought about by heavy drinking. The reformers began a campaign against drinking. The campaign is known as the Temperance Movement. In 1826, concerned citizens in Boston formed the American Temperance Society, and in a few years, about 1,000 local organizations sprang up across the nation. Some temperance groups took a moderate approach and asked people to drink less alcohol. Other groups insisted that the sale of alcohol be banned altogether. The campaign against alcohol. Southerners turned out to be especially zealous temperance workers. Well-to-do planter Joseph Florney toured Georgia, collecting signatures on a petition requesting the statewide prohibition or banning of liquor. Another wealthy planter, John Cock of Virginia, led the crusade for a nationwide prohibition of alcohol. In 1836, Cock became the president of the American Temperance Union. Northern and Southern temperance societies used propaganda to win support for their cause. They held meetings, gave speeches, and distributed pamphlets. They even sang songs such as "Drink nothing, boys, but water," and "Father, bring home your money tonight." State legislators took the reformers' message to heart. In 1838, Massachusetts passed the 15-gallon law. This act banned the sale of less than 15 gallons of liquor at a time, unless doctors prescribed it as a medicine. Yeah, you heard that right. Alcohol was sometimes used for medicinal purposes back then. In 1851, Maine became the first state to ban the manufacture and sale of alcoholic drinks. By 1857, several states had passed prohibition laws. Many Americans protested the laws, and most of the other laws were later repealed. The temperance movement stayed alive, though, and found renewed support later in the century. The Second Great Awakening. A revival or reawakening of religious faith and social feeling occurred in the early 1800s. During this period, ministers went from town to town, preaching to large crowds. Preachers urged listeners to renew their faith and cure the evils of society. This movement, called the Second Great Awakening, filled many Americans with determination to make social reforms. Ideal communities. Some religious reformers wished to reorganize American society. These reformers attempted to organize societies that ensured the ideal life for all members. Such societies practiced communal living. Communal living means that all members of a community live together and are considered equal. A new European idea called socialism influenced the founders of these societies. Socialism means that a community of people own all property together, not as individuals. Socialists tried to do away with poverty and inequality. A famous English socialist, Robert Owen, started such a community at New Harmony, Indiana. All adults were expected to work 8 hours a day, while children received free education. Many of the community members, though, found it hard to follow Owens's strict policies. By 1827, the community had failed. Religious communal groups. Joseph Smith attempted to build a religious communal society by founding the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormon Church. Smith's movement, called Mormonism, enjoyed rapid growth and established communal living at Kirtland, Ohio. Later, persecution drove the Mormons west to Utah. The Shakers, founded by Ann Lee in 1772, also established communal living. They isolated themselves from the rest of the world and supported themselves by working in small industries. The Shakers led simple lives. Although few Shakers are left, their handiwork, especially furniture, is highly valued by collectors today. The growth of religious groups, revival meetings, the building of thousands of new churches, and the founding of scores of colleges and universities characterized the Second Great Awakening. Although most of those caught up in the Second Great Awakening were white, free African Americans established their own churches at this time. These Baptist and Methodist churches proclaimed the message of spiritual salvation. This message had special meaning for those who suffered from the bonds of slavery. Thanks for listening.